Hello everyone, I am Dr. Scott Petrie, your instructor for improving teacher and student relationships. Welcome back to the second lecture on this wonderful book, Phoning Parents by Michael Goldstein. This is a cheap, inexpensive book, about $5.36 on Amazon.com. It costs less than a venti latte from Starbucks, so you have no excuse to go out and get it. A big thank you to the great people at Match Education for making this wonderful book, and I should mention the author's name. It's Michael Goldstein. So in this mini lecture, this is the second lecture, you can look at the blog to refresh your memory on the first lecture. But for this lecture, we're going to talk about the 6 different types of phone calls that we will make to parents, and these are called proactive parent phone calls. And the book explains there are 6 types that you should make, and they advocate you making them daily, especially at the beginning of the year. If you read the Harvard study on the website, you know that making these phone calls making these proactive phone calls to parents has an immediate payoff. It creates stronger connections between teachers and students. It creates more student involvement, and it creates improved parental involvement. So it's a win-win-win 3 ways, right? The book also recommends making this systematic behavior or systemic behavior where you're going to invest 30 minutes a day in making these phone calls. These calls should be no longer than 5 minutes each. Which means, essentially if you do the math, you can make about 6 calls a day or 36 calls a week. And if you have about 180 students for your total student load, that means it will take you about 5 weeks to connect with every parent of every student in your classroom. So Match gives 6 reasons for making these phone calls. 1, it shows courtesy and respect to both the student and the parent. They know that you care about their child. 2, you know the parent actually got your message because you hear them on the other end of the phone saying, wait, turn down the TV. What did he do? So you hear, and this is the third advantage, is that phone call communication is one-to-one communication. You don't have to worry about them mishearing something. You don't have to worry about it not getting delivered, the note staying in the student's backpack. The next way is to provide parents with more detailed information about their child's progress and about their behavior than the progress reports or dailies that we teachers deal with students. Instead of finishing this little daily at the last 2 minutes of class before the kid runs out, you actually have a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to have a leisurely phone call and conversation with the parent. And in this phone call, you can provide specific advice to the parent. And then the last reason is once you start making these phone calls and the child realizes you have a good relationship with their parent, all of a sudden you see a student increase in investment in your classroom and investment in the learning that goes on in your class happen quite a bit. So we're going to talk about these 6 different types of phone calls. The first is the praise call. And in this call, the teacher, you, describe a positive choice or a goal that was met by the student. For a lot of kids, this breaks a negative cycle for struggling students. If a kid's having a bad day, they haven't finished their homework, they haven't done all this, a positive phone call gives them a chance to kind of start fresh and have a better day the next day. But you should make sure your praise is specific and detailed on what the child has done, and you should focus on effort, choices, and accomplishments that happen in your class. This could be he wrote 4 great paragraphs, or he led a discussion in class today and he called on everybody fairly. Whatever the praise is, make it specific and centered around the child. So, the next call is what we call a correction call. And this correction call describes something that the student needs to improve. These calls help students and parents understand what the improvement will look like in the context of your classroom. And when you make this call, you can decide what are the next steps for beginning this process of improvement in your class. So correction calls should really only be made when you've done a couple of the proactive calls. The next call is the check-in call, and this is where you see how the student is doing with the classwork and the homework. You actually speak to the student before you speak to the parent on this call. And when you call and you catch the student, first of all, they're always shocked and stunned that you're actually calling them. But you can say something like, hey, you didn't finish your homework in class today. What was the problem? Is there something I can help you with? Remind them, this is what you're doing for homework tonight. Get it out. I'll help you start it right now. So you talk to the child for about 3-4 minutes, reaffirming their purpose, what they have to do, and then you just recap with the parent and you let the parent know why you called and what it was for. So next, we talk about text messaging. The bane of my existence as the parent with a tween. So text messaging can be praise or reminders. You should not use texting for corrections or concern phone calls. You should call instead, just because it's more personal. And then there are several packages that help you automate these text messages and send a lot of them at one time. Be careful not to totally automate it, or you risk losing the personal bond that you have established with these phone calls. But I do want to let you know there are services like Remind.com or Remind 101 that help you personalize these multiple messages to parents. And I've put a link to those in the blog later. I should mention that texting is the most popular form of communication for teenagers. 87% of high school seniors text every day, whereas only around 60% use Facebook. And gosh, I think actual phone calls are down to 40%. And that's a huge departure from what it was like when I was a teenager. I remember my parents yelling me to get off the phone. Now I guess we're going to yell at our kids to stop texting. So, but you should also remember that this might not be the medium of choice for parents, so you should ask the parents what type of messages they prefer. Do they want to get text messages from you when there's an upcoming quiz or a test, or do they want just the personal phone calls? So, next is what we call the summit. This is an in-person emergency meeting with both the student and the parents. And this is where you can talk about your concerns about what behavior is not changing, about what still needs to be done to put the student on a path to success. So the goal of this meeting is to brainstorm with the parent and create a plan that's going to help the student. You should be warm and friendly, but unapologetic about your high expectations for their child, for your student, their child. This is your opportunity to make the parent your partner. So keep it positive and be emphatic. The student needs to do this. So that basically wraps up this little lecture on proactive phone calls to parents. Now I look forward to taking this conversation to the discussion boards. I'm interested in how you can schedule proactive parent phone calls into your teaching practice next year. Will you do a half hour a day? Will you do an hour every other day? Will you save it all for Sunday afternoon and spend 3 hours on the phone? Regardless of how you're personally going to schedule it, I hope that you'll consider making proactive phone calls next year. They'll get your school year off to a good start. And I have put a number of references on the blog. There's a tip on how to use Google Voice so you don't have to give your cell or home number to parents. And there's also a link to the Remind 101 or the iTunes universe or the iTunes store that has the app for Remind 101 to send out mass text messages to your students whenever there are quizzes and homework assignments and stuff like that. So be sure to check out those additional resources, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much for listening.